Today, we have a very special episode planned. We're going to be speaking with Mrs. O&L from Our Next Life. And she's coming on the show today, and she's bringing with her some breaking news. This is a really big deal. As many of you know, the O&Ls have hidden behind the veil of secrecy for the past 2 years, and they teased us with that true identity as they continued to create and share ridiculously awesome content. Many of you have emailed us over the last 6 months to a year telling us we had to get on the bandwagon and we had to bring her on the show to share her story. And Brad and I concurred. So we've been collaborating behind the scenes to bring her on, and we wanted to time it around her official reveal. That way we could get the real story. So today, the veil of secrecy has been broken, and Mrs. O&L is coming in to share their journey, where they came from, and what they're actually planning on doing with this next chapter in their life. Welcome to the Choose FI Radio Podcast.
You're listening to Choose FI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. Choose FI, your home for financial independence online.
Brad, I don't think I'm overstating it to say that this is kind of a big deal. I mean, this is something that the FI community has been looking forward to this for quite a while now. And I feel like I don't think we can keep this going much longer, but we have a nice little 2-week streak going on right now. I mean, last week, JD Roth repurchases Get Rich Slowly. And today, this is another bombshell announcement.
You're right. It's not every day we get to break some big, exciting news here in the FI community. So Miss O&L is a prolific and accomplished writer, and we've had so many people list their blog as their favorite blog in our hot seat questions, or have people email us in to get them on the show. So A, this is long awaited in general, but B, to be able to break this news of their identity. They're finally coming out from behind the veil of anonymity here, and they've hit their FI number, and they are on the glide path here for the end of their jobs, and it's an exciting time. So this should be a really, really fun conversation.
Well, Mrs. O&L, welcome to the Choose FI Radio Podcast. How are you doing today?
I am doing great. It's so awesome to be here with you guys. Thanks for having me.
Well, we are absolutely thrilled. As Brad was referencing a few minutes ago, I think we've had at least 3 of our guests say that you were the one blog that had an impact on their life. And I'm not surprised. I went back to go check out your content. I think you're approaching 300 articles at this point, and you have a compelling writing style that's uniquely your own. You're just a better writer than I am at every single level. You're just an amazing writer. So it's a real joy to get a chance to go read through your content, and then now hopefully today to share some of that with us.
Thank you for saying that. That's super nice. It is something that I have. This blog has, I think, in many ways sort of taken over my life, but in the best way possible. It's something that I never expected would be this big a thing when I started, and I just really wanted to chronicle the journey. But then this community, which you guys know is so amazing, and I have so many folks who I count as real friends that have come out of this, that it's made it really easy to keep going and to want to really care about putting out good content on a regular basis. So it's been a lot of work, but it doesn't feel like work. It feels like the fun kind of time spent.
And I know we have a lot of audience members that have been holding their breath since the Mad Scientist episode, where they didn't get to find out who you really were. So would you like to go ahead and make that reveal now?
Do I have to? No, just kidding. Yeah, it's up on the blog today too. So folks can check it out there with photos. But my name is Tanja, spelled with a J, Tanja, and Mr. O&L is my husband, Mark. So we are super excited to get to actually use our real human names moving forward.
That is awesome. Brad, before the show started, I was taking a guess at what the name was going to be, and I decided it was going to be Kristen Ollinger. I don't even know if I know a Kristen Ollinger. That was going to be her name. I was so sure of it.
I think there's something kind of Germanic in that, which is close to my ethnic background. But yeah, otherwise, no, you were totally wrong.
So Jonathan, out of the trillions of possible combinations, that's the one you came up with out of thin air?
I heard a voice.
Well, Tanja, how does it feel? I mean, this has got to be a weird day, right? So you've been blogging for 3 years. This has become a significant part of your life. And part of it has been this anonymity, right? And the cute, like, smiley face with the hearts over eyes and all this stuff. What does it feel like on today? I mean, today is your big, quote, reveal day. Like, I mean, what did it feel like when you woke up this morning?
Yeah, it is definitely surreal. I think there's so much surreal going on in life right now. Like, it still doesn't totally feel like this is actually happening, that we're actually retiring. So I think that's one whole level of weirdness that exists. I mean, obviously we've both now given notice, so it's actually happening. But, I think the journey to FI and to early retirement is so long that on some level, I think we all have to be in kind of this suspension of disbelief state, and just, like, it becomes this thing on paper. But for us anyway, it feels a bit mind-boggling that it's actually happening. And then to layer onto that, yeah, our faces are up on the blog today, our names are there, where we live is there, which we can talk about a little bit later if you guys want. So it's funny, it's definitely going to be an adjustment, because I have spent the last almost 3 years with the blog being extremely careful and figuring out every possible way to hide our info so that we didn't accidentally get outed early. So now to actually put stuff up there willingly is kind of weird.
So I've certainly seen many bloggers try to preserve their anonymity, but you've gone to great lengths. And I've always been curious. You talk about it, being your job, and that if people found out, it would be horrific. But talk me through, like, if you could, your actual profession, like, why you think that it would have been so catastrophic, and just any other details you guys thought through on why it was so essential to be anonymous.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably horrific is overstating it a little. And I know the consequences of this would really just be for us. So the main thing is that the field that we're both still working in for just a couple more months is a very small world. And if all of this came out and we were let go, it would totally spoil our plans. We moved from a big city where we had a lot of job options about 6 years ago. And we've been in a small mountain town where I think the best we could each hope to do would be a job that earns maybe a third of what we earn now. So it's mostly been that. It's mostly just been a recognition that if this all came out, we couldn't rely on being able to keep our jobs at that point, and then that would just derail the whole plan. Like right now, we're able to save at a kind of mind-bogglingly fast rate because of the sweet gig we have. And it would mess all of that up if we came out a bit too early.
And I'm sure there are people that have concerns, and we kind of have vague concerns about whether or not it would be bad for us, for our employers, to find out that we are pursuing this FI path. I'm curious for you, which part of that seemed the most dangerous? Was it from a career perspective? Was it the fact that you are sharing your thoughts on personal finance on the internet? Was it that you have this extraordinarily high savings rate? Was it that you have a plan to get out of the market within the next 6 months? In your mind, what did those threads look like that made this somewhat dangerous for you to get, I guess the word would be, doxxed, right?
Yeah, I think the main thing for us is just that the work we've been doing is the type of work where you're expected to be fully committed, and it would suggest a lack of commitment. And I think also the fact that we're both off-site, so we're remote staff, I think probably Mark would have had a better chance of being able to keep doing it, but I don't know that I would have been able to. I work for a company where people stick around a long time. I've been in my job for 15 years, and that's not abnormal at all. And so when you're signaling that you're not necessarily loyal or you're not going to be there for the long haul, it's just not something where anyone's going to invest in you or entrust you with sensitive long-term things. We also have just long-term client relationships, and I can't see being the person who would get assigned to things or who would be allowed to pursue things if everybody knew I was leaving at a certain point.
So Tanja, I feel like we're kind of, even on the show, having to slowly extract all this information because you're just clutching onto it just out of old habits. I don't know. Can you share that with us? What line of work were you in?
I know, it's funny. I this is where I'm like just falling into old habits. I actually don't mind saying. So, and I think this will probably be disappointing to lots of folks who have said on our various surveys over time that they think we work for the Big Four. But in fact, we've both been political consultants. So a combination of political candidates, political causes, but also a lot of issue campaigns that are in some way related to policy or government outreach types of work. So it probably will surprise no one to know that Mark has been on the polling side. So he is our resident data guy. And then I have been on the communications side, which is a lot of writing and speaking and all of the stuff that I talk about on the blog.
Interesting.
It's
Yeah, I
high
wondered
commitment
about
work.
the old habits about we moved from a big city to a small mountain town. Like it's hard to break the habits, right? I mean,
You can stop me if I do that.
Well, no, I won't stop you. I'll just ask a follow-up question. What is this small town that you moved to?
I know. I realized that as I was saying it. The small town that we moved to is in North Lake Tahoe on the California side, which I think will probably be a surprise for lots of folks who think we live in Colorado. And the big city we moved from most recently was LA, where we lived for 8 years. But then before that, we were both DC people. So our jobs are DC jobs.
Well, that is a very small town and a very close-knit community. I don't know if you would call it kumbaya close, but people do tend to know each other. One of the things I was very impressed by as I was reading through your content was just how you made the very complex subject of healthcare accessible. And while you don't necessarily have the perfect solution, I felt like you at bare minimum understood the problem and was able to distill it into maybe 20 or 30 articles that I was able to understand and then have a better grasp of what the challenges were in terms of what faced the early retiree. And so do you feel that your background and your work in the field that you were in some way enabled you to get that content, or was that all self-taught?
Yeah, it will probably surprise no one here again to know that healthcare is an issue that we have both worked on some. Mark has done polling around it to figure out what folks know, and I have done some work over the years on different aspects of healthcare policy and helping people understand it. And my work really for the last 15 years has been to take incredibly complex policies and make them understandable to people who don't have PhDs and who don't focus on this stuff every day. So absolutely, I think that has very much been a skill that I've honed at work and that I hope to always take with me.
And Tanja, it's so funny, and I can speak proudly as a member of your audience and for other members of your audience. Like, it's almost like when you read a novel and you are picturing the places that you're reading about and the people in the story and whatnot. And, I, for whatever reason, came up with this whole, just like Jonathan came up with your random name that he picked out of a trillion different possibilities. I, for some reason, thought you lived in either New York or Boston previously, and we're now in Colorado. I guess, I don't know why, but I guess we all think you live in Colorado. So yeah, it's kind of cool to actually learn the truth behind the story now.
Yeah, and you are not alone in that. In the latest reader contest, 40% of people thought we live in Colorado. So common misconception, which I think just also plays to the fact that we've talked about skiing a lot, and Colorado is the highest concentration of ski resorts in the country. And I talk a ton about flying United. And so I think a lot of people maybe subconsciously went to Denver, which I do fly through, but it is certainly not my home airport.
That's funny because that is one of the main reasons as a travel rewards guy, that's exactly what I thought of. I saw a recent post, I think of yours, that had 994,000 miles and Premier 1K status. So yeah, I figured for sure Denver International was the option.
You're selling me short. I have 1.3 million United
Whoa,
miles.
Okay. I saw an older article. My fault. I thought it was recent. Evidently, I was wrong. That's amazing.
No, they pile up quickly. So that was not too long ago. But yeah, I will probably be to 1.4 before we quit.
Wow. So you've just been stockpiling those. So I assume in post-retirement, it's going to be, okay, we have all these United miles. Let's use them, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that I'm especially known for in the FI community is being incredibly risk averse and really focusing on a lot of contingency planning. And so our post-retirement budget is built around essentially being able to cut it in half if we have to. We paid off the house so we can live really cheaply, but that mileage stockpile and also some Marriott points and some Chase points are all things that we will definitely use if, for example, we don't have money that year because the markets are crappy to be able to fly, so that we can still fly to cheap places and still live really cheaply and still travel even if the economy is totally in the tank.
So when you say cut it in half, so your proposed budget, do you have a budgeted spend for, let's say, this past 12 months? And how do you anticipate that your first 12 months in post-retirement or whatever, in FI, whatever you want to call it, how does that compare to the prior 12 months?
Yeah, there are a lot of things that are going to change for us that have made it a little bit of an apples to oranges problem. We've been living very, very close to what we have budgeted for post-retirement, but some of the things are going to get cheaper. Some are going to get more expensive. I travel so much for work that a lot of my meals are covered elsewhere. So we actually think our grocery budget is going to need to go up a little bit, which I don't know many other folks who are thinking about that. In some ways, though, we'll be able to save money because we won't have to buy any convenience foods that we can make from scratch. So I think that will more likely offset some of the things like our gas is probably going to go up because we're going to travel more. Our heating bills might go down a little bit. Natural gas is so expensive here, but we might have time to go out and get more wood ourselves. And so be able to offset some of that. So there are definitely things that are going to change, but it's going to feel pretty similar overall to our lifestyle right now, just without work paying for a lot of our travel. Like we're right now able to tack on days here and there to different trips, and that's obviously going to go away. So some of those things we're going to have to pay for. But the cut in half point is that we've built a budget that we feel like we could cut it in half, spend half of what we plan to spend and still be okay. Like not have as amazing a life, but still be able to do some fun things. Like where we live, we can get out and hike and climb and paddle and bike and do a whole bunch of things without having to spend any money other than maybe just like little parts here and there on bikes or things like that. And then we, for next year, took the big step of buying our first midweek ski pass, which is pretty cheap. And so we can ski a ton for not nearly as much as people pay if they just come up for the day or for a weekend. So there's still plenty we can do, even if we're living at a super low budget.
One of the things I'd like to talk about with you, Tanja, is your idea of early retirement. Now, Brad and I focus more on this idea of financial independence here, but early retirement is a reality for many people in our community. And since you've been writing about this for 3 years, my understanding is that your mindset towards that concept really shifted. How did you view early retirement? What was the goal when you started this blog and when you started this journey? And how do you view the idea of early retirement now?
Yeah, it's been a real evolution for us, and one that I think has been pretty surprising. And it's made me realize most of us have that hard wiring to really just want what we can't have. And I think 5-6 years ago when we were first formulating our plan, or then even 3 or 4 years ago when we were really stepping it up, we were so stressed out by work. It was so much travel, it was so many long hours, all-nighters, things like that. We just wanted the opposite of that. And the opposite of that to us was never having to work again. And so we built our financial plan around that idea of never needing to rely on an earned income again. And that's still true. We've still hit those numbers. And so assuming that we don't have some catastrophic financial disaster, the likes of which the world has never seen, we never will need to rely on outside income. But the interesting thing, and I actually credit the blog with this, is that this process of getting closer has made us realize that there are parts of work that we actually really like. There are parts of work that we're going to miss, and there are things that we really enjoy doing. And some of those things are just knowing that we're having an impact on people's lives in a positive way is something that we don't want to give up. And so we plan to volunteer a lot, but not just in sort of like a go walk the dogs at the shelter kind of way, although that's important and everyone should go do that, but really trying to use some of the skills that we have and be almost like coaches for nonprofits and help them operate at maximum efficiency or help their boards of directors do really solid work because those are things we've been able to do at work. So that's something we were thinking about doing more at first, but then we realized, you know what, we actually might even earn some money doing this stuff, and that's okay. That'll help be a bit of a release valve on taking the pressure off of our portfolio so that we still have some wiggle room, even if the markets are having a stretch of anemic years. But more importantly, it's just been realizing that like it's so easy to look at everything that stresses us out at work and group all that stuff together. And we've realized that it's still worth breaking that stuff apart and thinking like, okay, this whole set of paperwork might be something I don't enjoy, or the long hours might be too much, or having to always be reachable on the weekends, like that might not be sustainable. But that doesn't mean it's all bad. And things like for me, writing or presenting are things that I love and will totally miss. And so we've been thinking more and more about how we can keep doing that to a much, much lesser extent, but do some of that in retirement in a way that'll pay us a little bit, like enough to just maybe splurge here and there or take some of that pressure off the portfolio, but we'll also really just kind of scratch a deeper itch, something that we love doing and don't want to totally give up.
Don't you think that early retirement is conceptually different from the idea of just, I guess, regular retirement or retirement at this regular age where you have this massive 30 or 40 year window that you're trying to figure out what to do with it?
It's so funny because I think for a concept that's actually as socially new as retirement, we seem to have these very fixed ideas about it as a society. Like retirement wasn't even really a thing for most people until the New Deal. So that's less than 100 years ago, which in terms of human history is the blink of an eye. So the idea of quitting at 65, that was invented by the actuaries who said, if we set the point for Social Security here, this is the point at which we can keep it solvent, way back when they designed that stuff. So it's funny that the age of 65 has taken on such meaning to all of us as this point when you're supposed to retire, and that retirement is supposed to be sitting in your recliner and watching game shows or fishing golfing or sipping umbrella drinks. I think traditional retirement is definitely something that looks very different for different people. Lots of people second act and do cool volunteer work or start their own consulting businesses or do entrepreneurship. And it feels like there's no reason why we actually need to think of early retirement as any different from that. It's just on a different timeline. And obviously the money behind it is different because you don't have all the tax advantaged vehicles behind it to retire early the same way. You don't have government health care like Medicare that kicks in earlier, although that could change certainly in upcoming decades, although it's not looking good at the moment. But that feels to me like the only real difference. It's sort of like worth having the whole discussion about retirement and not trying to break out early retirement as this completely distinct thing.
I think what's so fascinating to me is, in my mind, our community is redefining retirement. Now, we have a very small community, but there's almost a battle being fought for what that word actually means. And on the one side, you have this kind of stick in the mud type mindset where it means you're not allowed to do anything. You're not allowed to earn income. If you're retired, that means that you're retired. And I think that what I see in your case and in my case and in many other people in our community, it's not what are you retiring from, but it's what are you retiring to? And that becomes the new question. And it's a much more exciting framework in my mind.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And it's so funny because I don't think any 70-year-olds who are working have to answer this question of, are you really retired or not? And I don't know how many early retired people in real life have to answer it. It feels like one of those blog echo chamber type questions that the retirement police like to bring up. But yeah, absolutely. It's like if I started realizing that, hey, I want to keep writing this blog and I might monetize it in some way, the idea that might now mean I'm not retired, it's just ridiculous. Like, I believe really strongly that retirement is whatever we make it. And if we want to call ourselves retired, then we're retired.
You talk about a concept called the freedom to fail on your blog. And I'd love to hear you explore that. I think there's so much value there, both for the people that are working towards FI and have not retired, and for the people that have already reached FI and have exited the workforce and are now pursuing this passion project. I'd love to hear your take on this concept of the freedom to fail.
Absolutely. It's interesting. I presented at the Lola Retreat, which was a retreat about money for women held in Portland back in August. And one of the questions that came up was, how is early retirement different from just starting to work for yourself? And it was funny because I'd never really thought about it, but I kind of realized in that moment, like, it's not that different. It's just a sequence different. So it's like some people might be comfortable having very little savings and quitting a traditional job and going out and starting some venture that they don't need to make them rich, but they hope will at least cover their expenses. That has never been me. I'm a safety blanket, big safety net kind of person. So it's sort of similar, but it's just a different sequence. So we saved up all the money first, and then now we get to go out and try these different things. And it's an incredible gift that if I want to try to write a book, I can try to write a book. And if it fails, oh well, like that was fun. It doesn't have to actually make me any money or pay any bills. And I think that is one of the best parts of early retirement, is that we can try all this different stuff. But like, if it doesn't pan out financially, no big deal. As long as you didn't throw all your investments at making it work, then you're still fine. And then you can try the next thing. But that to me is one of the things that makes me feel so incredibly lucky to get to do this. And almost like, I'm sure you guys agree, we are some of the luckiest people in human history for getting to like buy our way into all this leisure time and this time to try different stuff that just gets us fired up and makes us feel excited to get out of the bed in the morning.
Oh, there's no question about it. I feel that every single day. I mean, we really are as fortunate as anyone in human history. That's a great way of putting it. I've never thought about it on that grand of a scale, but you're absolutely right. And it's shocking to me how negative some people can be about this early retirement. Whereas if you just kind of reframe it like you did, which is, at least I always talk about the financial independence aspect. It's buying back decades of my life to be able to do what I want. And to have the freedom to, as you said, you can try all this stuff, you can fail, you can do whatever you want. I mean, that's just such a wonderful, wonderful position. I am curious, have you seen any personal like blowback in your life? Have you told family or friends about your early retirement plans? And what have people's opinions been?
We have, I think, just extraordinarily supportive and wonderful friends and family. And so we haven't gotten any blowback. We've gotten nothing but support. You know, a few folks who maybe don't know us quite as well have said things like, well, what do you think you'll do? Sort of that implication that I think we've all heard of, like, is there a chance you might be bored? I think the folks who know us well know that I am congenitally incapable of being bored. I'm just curious and interested in too many things. So if one hobby or something doesn't pan out, I'll just move on on to the next one. But I've heard from lots of readers over the years who have had trouble with friends or family around them not being supportive or spouses not being supportive. And so it's for sure a phenomenon out there. But I really do think it's impacted by how you present it and how you talk about it. And I think for us, we've always had a really strong why behind it. And I don't know if you guys are familiar, but I love when Elon Musk talks about the Mars projects that he's working on. He has this really incredible why, which is he said something like, all of this work I've done, all these billions of dollars I've made, this will only have been worth it to me if I can make humans an interplanetary species. And that's a cool why. That is not my why. But I think for us, like what I would say for that is like what will have made it worth it is if we can ultimately leave the world a better place than we found it, if we can make a positive impact on people. And that's something that I think comes through when we talk about this, that we talk about not just wanting to like sit around and live a hedonistic lifestyle, although like who knows, there could be some of that. But we talk a lot about wanting to volunteer more or wanting to be able to work for the types of organizations that can't afford to hire our companies, but we'd still like to be able to help them. Or, you know, just writing the blog, I feel like it started as documenting my own personal journey, but has turned into something that I do feel like is helping some people, which is a really wonderful feeling. And so I think sharing that motivation with people, I do think others out there, when they tell the story, they feel like, oh, it's such a foreign concept to folks that I want to tread lightly here and not share a lot and just sort of say like, we want to quit our jobs. But I think that's underselling it. Like, I think actually talking about your why and talking about what you're retiring to and what your purpose is really helps people get it and be much more supportive. So I really encourage folks to talk about it that way.
It's like I'm channeling myself talking to you. It's amazing.
That was freaking amazing.
Now, obviously, you have a very friendly audience here, but this is a question that I know Brad and I have both been on the other side of, and I'm curious to get your take on this. What do you do when people ask you, what are you going to do with all your free time? Aren't you going to be bored? Now, I'll just set this up by saying that Brad and I have come to the conclusion more and more that it's not, what am I going to do with my free time? But how did I ever have time for a 9 to 5? Because when you spend all this time being intentional and coming up with a game plan, you start filling that gap with things that add value to your life. What are your thoughts on that? Do you agree, disagree?
Oh, I already feel that way. And I'm still working. And we've also had the types of jobs that have been more than 9 to 5. So I think we're going to probably fall very quickly into this feeling, but in an even more acute way, perhaps. Because, yeah, I think we've recognized for a while now as we've started to build out the dream lists or like, what are all the things we want to do when we quit, and have realized like, we're not going to get through all of this stuff, even without jobs, even with the means to be able to pursue these wacky ideas. We're still probably not going to see every country in the world and climb all the mountains we want to climb and do all these like zany ideas we have, like go to central casting and get to be cast in extras in some like terrible action movie and have a garden and sew our clothes, like and all the stuff. So I think we're going into it with an attitude of like, here's a whole bunch of stuff we'd love to do, but also really try to keep the future open so we can just stumble into new adventures and see where life takes us.
I love the idea that you shared on the Mad Scientist podcast about the idea of the endless winter.
Oh, yeah. We are still debating what kind of recreational vehicle we want to get. But yeah, we have this idea of being able to do kind of the reverse of like surfers who do the endless summer and follow the summer around the globe and get to surf everywhere when the swells are big. We want to be able to drive all over and basically just follow the winter south, go ski in South America, ski really wherever the snow is falling, but do like a whole year following the snow. And it sounds really fun. Ask me again about halfway through if I'm still into that much cold for that long, but it's something we definitely want to try.
I remember that you stated that you guys keep your house at 55 degrees. Is that something you're still doing? Have you been able to maintain that?
Yeah, we still do that. It is something that was a huge awakening when we left LA and moved up here to Tahoe. The first natural gas bill we got, and our house is not huge. It's not a teeny little minimalist house. It's about 1,800 square feet. But the first heating bill we got in the winter was $500. And you can just imagine like the shocked reaction that we had. And so we very quickly said like, okay, we've got to scale this down. And I think that was only heating the house to maybe like 63 or 64. So not super balmy by any means. But we started experimenting with how low we could go. And we really realized that, you know what, you can always throw on more clothes. So there have been days where we're sitting working at our desks and we're both wearing fleece socks, fleece pants, like a sweatshirt with a big robe over it, a hat, and sometimes fingerless gloves too, which I know it sounds a little bit extreme and then is crazy because we're also people who've spent like $1,000 on a single meal once in our lifetime. So we know we're a bit of a contradiction in that we're not crazy frugal on all counts, but we do think of ourselves as environmentalists. So realizing that we could save natural gas and save money at the same time, it became sort of like a fun challenge of how cold can we deal with? And I will totally confess to you guys, we do have some days where we go like, okay, this is just too cold, and we'll turn it up to like 60. And then we'll see if we can be a little tougher in the next day.
When you're talking me through that picture of you guys sitting there with hats and coats and these fingerless gloves, now that you're not anonymous, you have to put that on the website, by the way. Like, how fantastic would that be?
Okay, deal. Once we get into full winter here, I'll work on a picture for you guys.
Nice. I cannot wait to see it. And yeah, I just wanted to go back real quick to the question about, aren't you going to be bored in retirement? And I hear that one quite often, and it always bothers me as like the ultimate limiting belief. And you have literally the whole world. You could do anything. You could learn languages. You could learn to cook. You could pick up some new sport that you've never done. You could do anything. Read 1,000 books a year. I mean, you could do anything you want. How could you conceivably be bored? It just is baffling to me.
I have a bit of a theory on this just because I've now gotten quite a few letters from folks who have actually experienced that, and many of them have actually gone back to work. And my belief is that it stems not from the lack of possibility out there. And maybe in some cases it does come from that limiting belief, but I think it's more that it's very easy to spend your focus in planning for early retirement on looking at like, what are the numbers I need to hit? What's my budget? All the financial stuff. But I'm sure you guys feel the same way. Like, the math is actually the really easy part of all this. You have to do some learning at the beginning. There's a learning curve, but then you sort of figure out the basics, and it's not that hard. It's not rocket science. The hard part is figuring out like, what is it that you want out of life? What are the things you want to prioritize? Because I also think an environment where there's no structure, it can be very easy to just let the days and weeks and months slip by without accomplishing anything. So you do have to figure out like, what is the right structure for you to make sure that you're achieving the things that are important to you. But I think a lot of folks just don't put that thought in. And I think something else that I've heard from folks, we're about to head into this, so we'll see if this plays out for us. But like, the transition can be emotionally harder than a lot of people anticipate. Losing that identity of work, losing even just that feeling of like people coming to you and asking for you to make decisions or asking for your input on a project, like losing that and all of a sudden feeling like, hey, no one in the world actually cares what I have to say or what I think. I think that can be very damaging to people's self-esteem or their self-image. And so that's one of the reasons why I push so hard on the blog for people to do that thought in advance, to mentally prepare yourself, and also to figure out how to have what I've started calling chapter overlap, so that you don't have like your life before retirement and then you have your life after retirement. And there's nothing in those two things that cross over except maybe the people you know. So that's why for me, like, I've been so thrilled that the blog has become such a great thing, because this is something I'm doing now. It's something I'm going to do after, and I'm going to have some sense of continuity that'll carry me through. So I don't wake up one day and go like, oh my God, what do I do today? I have a thing that will keep me going. Even if I feel a little bit aimless or rudderless on other stuff, I'll still have that one big piece. And I think folks could achieve that any number of ways. You could have a volunteer gig that you keep doing that maybe you ramp up after you quit. Like, I do think it's important to give yourself time and space to recover, to detox from work, to just figure out like, what are the things that pique your interest once work isn't in the way anymore. But having some little thread of continuity, I really believe, is a big helpful thing. And just, again, like doing that thinking in advance of preparing yourself for when the work is gone and the upsides of work disappear along with the downsides.
Yeah, we talk about that mental preparation here on the podcast quite often. It's such a crucial point, and I'm glad you brought it up. I also love that idea of continuity. That's something that I had never fully considered. I think that's something hopefully the audience is really taking note of. But as far as mental preparation goes, we like to say it's important to game out just all kinds of different possibilities in the future, like even a market crash, right? Like, it's coming at some point, a market correction, whatever you want to talk about. But if you can prepare yourself mentally for how you're going to react, try to really think through how that's going to feel emotionally. And it's very similar to this when you actually pull the fight trigger, is think through, like you said, what do you get value out of? I personally never derived any real satisfaction from my job. Honestly, like I never felt terribly important or anything, but I know, like to your point, many people do. And okay, that's going to go away. So X, Y, and Z. Where am I going to get that from? I think these these are all crucial points. So, and again, to your point, the math is the easy part. It's the what am I going to do with my life? What is my life going to look like? And how am I going to feel psychologically on the other side? So I think those are all wonderful points.
I couldn't agree more with all of that. And I think it helps in my case that I have had several jobs and side hustles over the years that have been safety related. So I was a lifeguard, I was a camp counselor, I was an EMT for like 5 seconds, and have done jobs where you have to do disaster drills. And I think that that's a really useful way to think about finances. I think that's true for everyone, not just people in the FI space or FI community, but thinking about like, okay, we know a recession is going to come. Like, let's think through, okay, what might that look like? What steps might we take? And of course, when the real thing comes, it might all play out in a completely different way, but there is just value to preparing yourself for that and going through some of the motions. It's like where we live, we have wildfires and earthquakes. And so other people have hurricanes or tornadoes or other different possible disasters. Thinking through how you might operate in those moments. Cell phones might go down. Then what will you do when you can't just call or text people you need to get in touch with? Do you have a meeting place? What will you take with you if you have to evacuate quickly? All of those exercises make us mentally stronger. But I think for things like early retirement, they really are so crucial because then you have a little bit of a reservoir of calmness to draw on when the bad stuff happens. And you can react more rationally and not let it throw you off your game. And I think I'd apply that same thing to some of the stuff that you lose. So like, even if you don't love your job or you don't feel like there's anything positive or you don't feel important, like there might still be some things in there that you're getting out of it in the form of validation or just getting to use certain skills you have. So it's at least worth asking that question and figuring out like, okay, when this goes away, how might that feel? What will that look like? I just think those are all really good questions we should all be asking ourselves.
Jonathan, man, we are getting so many gems here. I mean, disaster drills, that's the quote that I'm going to use forever on this podcast. So Tanja, thank you. Whenever I go into my little spiel here of game planning out or whatever, it's just disaster drills from now on. So that was
hashtag disaster drill.
That's fantastic. So the other thing I wanted to mention, I know just personally from the other side of FI is that I know myself and I think humans generally crave progress in their lives and just seeing incremental improvement. And I know I've focused for so long on the mental aspects of things, but now I'm actually in post-FI, I'm focusing on physical things. Interestingly enough, I am basically starting out as a brand new beginner at both CrossFit and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So it's like I basically picked the two most difficult things I could find. And like I'm starting at basically day 0. But it's probably a 10-year journey for maybe each of them for me to be really, really good. But that's something now I have the time and effort to put into. And it's just, I can't tell you how rewarding it's been psychologically, certainly with the jiu-jitsu, to just see my progress this first year. And I think that's something, if I could definitely highlight to you personally, like find something where you can get those tangible items of progress and you see that on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. It's worked for me, and I would certainly recommend that to both you and to the community at large.
I love that. And good for you. I think it's so hard for people to take on things that are difficult. Like we just gravitate as humans toward the things that come easily to us. And I think it's why so many folks just have a really hard time stepping outside their comfort zone and trying different things. So I really admire that you took on stuff that was so tough. I mean, just objectively, but also, coming into it as an adult. It's funny. I taught yoga for 10 years in LA. That was my big side hustle that I eventually had to give up because work travel just got to be too much. But teaching yoga in LA, which I think of is thought of as like the capital of yoga in the world, is something that I think gives you this glimpse into a weird human phenomenon, which is again, just that idea of like staying away from things where you don't feel naturally good at it, because there are so many perfect yoga looking people there who come and do beautiful poses and make it all look easy, that I think it makes it extra intimidating for folks who are just like regular people who might want to use it as a form of exercise or a form of stress reduction or relaxation. But I admired most not the students who looked so perfect and could do the most jaw-dropping poses, but the ones who had to struggle a little bit, the ones who came in and were willing to suck at it sometimes. Like those to me were the people I admired most. And I think kudos to anyone who's willing to get that far out of your comfort zone and willing to maybe look a little silly sometimes, or just at the very least, like bruise your ego a bit. But those are the best things in life. If you can actually see that progress and make a breakthrough in that stuff, that feels so much better than just pursuing the stuff that comes easily.
This ties so nicely to this idea of how to achieve a successful retirement. The United States is particularly guilty of tying your identity to your job. I think that's what all of us have touched on. In fact, every single time I meet somebody and I find myself asking them, hey, what do you do for a living? I want to slap myself in the face because I hate that I've bought into that construct. But sometimes it's just the easiest question. And I think if you're going to be pursuing this idea of early retirement and financial independence, you have to extract your identity from that job that maybe you've been clutching onto for a long period of time. And I know that you've spent some time thinking about what questions do you need to answer in order to achieve early retirement. I'd love to walk through that with you.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Number one, the most important thing is how will you support your family without a job? And is that going to change?
Yeah, this is, I think, probably the place where most people start when they're thinking about early retirement or financial independence, is just kind of mapping out an income plan. And I think we're big believers that the 4% rule, just kind of ballparking that, is a little too simplistic, because you might have different sources of income that kick in at different times. And you might, for example, be counting on Social Security or not. But it's worth actually looking at what your sources of income could be, what you can plan for, when they might kick in. And so we have a graphic mapped out where until 2028, about 10 years into our early retirement, we're going to be almost wholly reliant on taxable investments along with any other side income we might make. But then after that, our rental income will kick in because we'll have the rental mortgage paid off. And so then that will take a bigger share. The taxable income will shrink a little bit. And then after Mark turns 60, then we'll start tapping into our 401ks, which are pretty overstocked at this point. So we should be able to really increase our spending at that point in time. So it really changes over time where our income is coming from. And it's not as straightforward as just looking at the 4% rule, doing 25X and calling it a day. But it's worth really everybody thinking about that. And your specifics will certainly be different from ours, but figuring out how they play out over time, what those amounts look like, and all of that to make sure you have a solid plan.
That is essentially just coming up with a drawdown strategy. It's just how, you spend all this time talking about how to accumulate this wealth, but once you're on the back end of that, it's the decumulation phase, right? It's the drawdown strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. And like in our case, it'll be some drawdown on taxable. Those may very well get fairly close to zero before we hit 60. But then the rental income is certainly, that's a asset that won't deplete itself the same way. And then if we do it right, our tax deferred investments, we hope to still have a good chunk when we move on, so that we can leave a big legacy behind. But yeah, absolutely. It's actually not thinking about just the saving, but then how these investments actually pay you back.
So just to be clear, you do not intend to access any of your tax deferred items, your 401ks, IRAs, until you're at least 59 and a half, based on what you just said, right?
Yeah, I know we're total weirdos in that regard. And it's not to say we're never going to do a single dollar in backdoor Roth conversion, but we're planning as much as possible to leave that money alone for a bunch of reasons. Like, one, we feel like right now, while we're still young, we can travel in a little bit more rugged fashion. If we're staying in hostels on squeaky rubber-coated mattresses, like, it's not the end of the world. We'll be fine. So we can travel a little cheaper. We also feel like right now we're still healthy. So while, of course, some crazy fluky healthcare thing could come around, it's less likely now, just statistically, than it is after 60. So we want to make sure that we have like a big, hefty fund sitting there for our later years. And so that's just been part of our underlying philosophy all along, is like, let's treat yourself, but like 60-year-old us, not us now. Obviously, we're lucky enough to get to pursue that strategy. That doesn't work for everybody else. Like, we've been able to max out our 401ks and save a ton in taxable so that we have this early retirement cushion. But the other thing I'll add that I think is a real benefit of the two-phase approach is it creates a whole other safety net where, like, even if we completely mismanage our money for the first 18 years, between Mark being 41 and 59, we still have this other whole pool of funding to fall back on. So we just have to make sure that we can cover our expenses and like earn enough that we can pay our property tax so we don't get our house seized by the state or something like that. And then we're going to be okay. And we'll have money for later. Like, that just to me is something that gives me enormous peace of mind and helps me sleep at night. And I recognize not everybody is a worrier like I am, and not everybody needs that. But for those who do, I think it's yet another bit of freedom to fail, where we can fail at early retirement and it actually doesn't jeopardize our traditional retirement. That will still be intact.
My wife will be listening to this episode just nodding her head in agreement the entire time. Like, what is the backup plan for the backup plan, right?
Totally.
Yeah, that's great to have these contingency plans. I love it. We're definitely of the same mind. I always try to think of worst case scenarios. It doesn't make for a very healthy psychological moment from time to time, but I think it's important to game these things out. So I love that. And I'm curious, so you said that the 4% rule is simplistic, which it certainly is, unquestionably. We are now calling it the 4% rule of thumb. So it's just like a very general thing. But you guys obviously came up with a FI number. How did you calculate that? Was it based off some type of percentage? Was it based off this is X, Y, and Z, what we need based on our proposed budget? Talk me through where you came up with that number.
This is one of those moments where the fact that we don't share our numbers makes it a bit challenging to talk this through, because really what we did is a series of projections that have no easy formula. We built a bunch of Excel sheets. We put in different rates of market return, and we looked at, okay, if we want to still have a little bit of money left at the end of phase one, when we're primarily living on taxable, how much do we have to start with? And then similarly, a projection of like, if we want to have X amount, being able to double our spending, taking inflation into account, by the time we hit 60, how much do we need to have saved there that we then leave alone for 18 years and just let grow? And then we just plugged in different numbers until we got to a place where it all worked. So we have a couple of posts that I can send you guys links to that show this a little bit better, like actually show a sample spreadsheet and what those projections look like. But it's not an easy formula to explain. It does take some trial and error. But, I also think this is a community of people who love an Excel formula. And so I don't think it's anything that folks should shy away from. It's just worth figuring out what your own circumstances are. Like if you have rental income or some other side income, or you expect an inheritance, or you have any other kind of windfall, you can sort of plug those in at different points. And for us, when I talk about our FI number, I'm primarily really talking about just the taxable savings, because we've been above the threshold that we needed in our 401ks for almost 3 years now. And so we keep maxing those, we keep saving those just to pad for the future. And so that like if we do convert a little bit through backdoor Roth, we've still got plenty. But it's mostly been knowing, okay, we have this 18-year period where we have to support ourselves on taxable. So what will that take? And that's been just purely an exercise in Excel formulas and projections.
Yeah, I love that. And we're certainly not looking for a simplistic answer. So that makes sense perfectly. And yeah, we will link all those articles up in the show notes, so everyone can find that if you head over to choosefi.com and just click podcasts in the upper corner.
All right, so Tanja, I guess specifically, what are the different things that people should be thinking about in terms of contingency plans and backup plans for their backup plans? What do you recommend they think about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of it is similar to things that you should be thinking about at any stage of life financially. So I'm a believer that you should still have some kind of emergency fund, even if you have plenty of assets, just because the market timing may not always be such that you want to liquidate assets, or you might have tax or healthcare subsidy reasons why you might not want to be selling shares at a given point. So having a little bit of cash savings set aside at all times, I think is a really smart move. I'm also a big believer in having insurance. So life insurance certainly isn't going to be something that everybody wants, but we both still have term policies. We'll have those until we're in our late 50s. We'll probably let them lapse at that point, but right now we're glad to have them. But I think more important for especially high net worth people is to have umbrella insurance. And we're with USAA, and they told me something really interesting, which is that you don't have to buy a big amount. What you're really buying with umbrella insurance is that your insurance company will mount a full legal defense for you. And so even if you buy only $1 million, which is typically the lowest that umbrella insurance will insure you for, they're still going to mount as vigorous a defense as they would if you were insured for $10 million, because they don't want to pay out a penny of that. And so that was a really good connection for me to make, to realize like, oh, okay, so you don't have to get like your full net worth covered by umbrella insurance. What you're really buying is that legal defense, and you buy that with the minimum amount. So that's worth considering.
Wow. Now that is a light bulb moment. Yeah. Now I have been considering and looking at that and trying to figure out at what point do you add that in, but people love it when I use my words. That's a game changer.
Yeah. And just to be clear, umbrella insurance is very inexpensive. I think we definitely pay under $200 a year for a $1 million policy. I think it's somewhere in the vicinity of $150 a year. So very, very inexpensive for that type of coverage.
Yeah, to me, it's a bargain for what you're getting in the way of peace of mind. And I think especially for us blogging on the internet, like people could potentially come sue us for something we write on the blog. Please don't. But
don't even plant that seed.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's all presented for entertainment purposes only, folks. But
the information on this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Please consult a financial professional before making any serious financial decisions. User.
Exactly. Exactly. I think I will add to what you said, Brad, though, that most insurance companies that offer umbrella will require you to have all your policies with them. So there are some costs that are a little bit less visible. Like you have to get your auto policy and your whatever other policies they might require up to a certain level before they'll add umbrella on. So there might be other costs associated with it. But I think all in, like to up our other policies to get to the threshold level and then to add umbrella, I think was like $300 a year, which is money that I consider very, very well spent. I think everyone who's pursuing FI and building up their assets should absolutely consider it. I mean, don't even consider it, just do it.
Yeah, that's a good point about needing multiple insurance policies with a company. And this is certainly not to plug Geico, but I just recently switched over to Geico for my auto insurance, which was like half of what I was paying previously. It was a huge savings. And they did let me get an umbrella policy with them without needing homeowners insurance. So I just have auto and umbrella with them. And I think to your point, I did need to up the coverage a little bit, but it was just like the underlying liability amounts. And I think that wound up costing me an extra like $20 or $30 per 6 months. So yeah, somewhere in the vicinity of an extra $50. So yeah, very similar to what you're quoting, Tanya, somewhere in the vicinity of $200 to $300 all in, which to me is money very well spent.
Yeah, and that's great to know that they don't require you to have homeowners. I think with USAA, we have like 8 or 9 different policies. So we're well covered with them, but it's awesome if there are options out there that let you buy less.
There's other general things that we've talked about in the past, like how are you going to ride out stock market crashes, extended recessions? We've kind of talked through several of those things before, but I really like that you highlighted the insurance component. I think it's very easy to gloss over that. I think the next thing we should talk about, frankly, is probably the biggest roadblock to the dream of early retirement, and that is healthcare. Do you want to maybe give us the high level picture on what your perspective on that is?
Yeah, I mean, you guys know I can definitely go on at length about this, but I think the big thing is really just the uncertainty that's out there with healthcare right now is forcing a lot of us to keep a lot more flexibility in the plan. That this is, to me, the biggest reason why I think the 4% rule is insufficient, not because the math underlying it doesn't hold up, but that the 4% rule is based on the idea that you can have level spending over time. And I think that with just not knowing what's going to happen with healthcare, with Medicare, with all of it, I don't think any of us can assume that level spending over many, many decades is realistic. Even with Medicare, I think everybody sort of says like, oh, we just need to get to Medicare and then we'll be fine. Like the average Medicare recipient still spends $200,000 out of pocket on healthcare in their lifetime. So it's not like Medicare is covering everything and is this amazing safety net. It covers things, and that's good to have, but we all need to be accounting for other potential spending. So I think right now, big picture is just keeping our eyes open. We're certainly going to stay on top of developments in policy, but also I think a point that I'd make too is it's worth looking at your own situation, whether it's doing some of the calculators on healthcare.gov if you're in a state that doesn't have its own exchange, or if, like us, you're in a state like California that has its own state exchange. You can do different calculations and actually figure out what your subsidy might potentially look like. So you can project what your out-of-pocket healthcare costs might be and look at what your out-of-pocket max will be. And that might tell you some useful information. Like if you play around with different income numbers, you might find that by raising your income a little bit, you're leaving a very large healthcare subsidy on the table. And that to me is a big benefit of looking really closely at things like tax loss harvesting, where I think all the listeners here know what that is, but like if your shares dip, you can sell some shares in a fund and buy another similar fund, but then lock in that loss and it gives you capital loss, which might be helpful in a tax sense. But what that also does is it lowers your cost basis in those shares. So then later when you sell them, you now have proportionally more capital gains there, which is counted directly as income in your AGI, which is how healthcare subsidies are calculated. And that extra bit of income might cost you a big healthcare subsidy. Like in our case, what we're looking at for next year is to get about a $600 per month reduction in our healthcare premiums. And that's huge. Like $7,000 a year that we'd be giving up to save a little bit of money in taxes is for sure not worth it to us. So this is not to say don't tax loss harvest, but just don't take it as a given that your tax minimization strategy is necessarily going to be the best thing across the board. It's worth also accounting for healthcare.
It can't be simple, can it?
No, of course not. No, none of this is simple. But the good thing is, like, all of us doing this, we're all smart people who like to dig into a little bit of math. So it's fun to have a couple extra things to have to think about, right?
Are you saying that the joys of our healthcare system feeds into the financial independence community need to optimize their Excel spreadsheets? Because I approve of that message.
Yeah. Let's go with that message.
Hey, Tanja, I'm curious mechanically how this works for the early retirees. So in 2017, you both are either working a full year or pretty darn close. So your income is going to be your normal income. But then in 2018, once you've pulled your FI trigger, your income is going to be close to zero. Mm-hmm. How does that work for the $600 per month subsidies you mentioned? Like, how do you mechanically go about saying, hey, look, I'm retired and my income is zero?
So the way that the exchange-based plans work is you have to either sign up during open enrollment, which is each fall, and heads up to folks who are thinking of signing up for next year that the open enrollment period has been shortened this year. And also they're going to do maintenance on healthcare.gov on Sundays. So you have many fewer days than usual. You have to sign up by December 15th. So don't forget, really important. So you either have to sign up during open enrollment, or if you lose your job mid-year, then that's considered a qualifying event, just like it would be for any healthcare. And then you can sign up at that point. But the way that the system is built under the Affordable Care Act for as long as it survives until the next thing comes is that you project forward. So you have to guess what your income is going to be in the next tax year. And if you lose a job mid-year, you have to figure out, like, make a guess for what your income will be for that whole year. And it's based on AGI, which is adjusted gross income. It's essentially everything, minus any IRA or 401k contributions. But it doesn't take into account standard deduction. It doesn't take into account mortgage interest, charitable, any of that stuff. So it's like the whole deal, everything that counts as taxable income. And then you get your health insurance based on that. They just essentially tell you, based on what your taxable income is, what your subsidy will be. And then you can choose if you want like a high deductible plan, a lower deductible plan, gold plan, bronze, all that stuff. Silver plans are the most heavily subsidized. So those are a good bet to go with for early retirees, or really anyone who is going to get the benefit of help with their premium. And then at the end of the year, when it's tax time, then you square up and reconcile. So like if you earned more than you thought, then you have to pay a little bit of that subsidy back. But if you hit it right on the nose, then you don't. And that's where early retirees are in a really good position, because most of us know exactly what our taxable income is. We know the dividends we've gotten. We know how much we've taken out and how much capital gains is there. And so I suspect a lot of us who are going to be doing this approach will each December be looking at, okay, how much have I earned? Do we have a little bit more room in the cap? That might be a place where we do a little bit of backdoor Roth conversion, just to make sure that we get all the way up to that level and take advantage of every penny. And then, if you have a year where you earn a little bit of extra side income, like I consider that a good problem to have. I would rather pay some of that money back, but have extra money that we've earned. So, I know some folks out there are hardcore tax avoiders. We are not. We believe in taxes. So we don't mind if we end up having to pay some of it back. But I think the whole thing just makes it so much easier to budget for. So it's worth doing some of that gaming things out before you proceed.
Talking about gaming things out, is it one of these, is it if you're $1 over, you lose the entire subsidy, or is it a graduated reduction in the subsidy?
There are different step levels in it. There is definitely a point at which you lose it all. For us, for a family of 2 in California, that level is around $70,000, which we will be earning way less than that. But if you're in that ballpark, yes, there is a point where you lose it all. But for most levels in between, and again, this varies a bit by state. Some states have Medicaid expansion, which raises eligibility levels. I won't bore you guys with all those different thresholds, because there's plenty of good stuff out there online and on our blog and on the Kaiser Family Foundation and on Root of Good. He has a great post on the subsidy cliffs, but you can kind of game out based on where you think you're going to fall. And then it's worth just going a couple steps above that and look at, okay, if we added $5,000, if we added $10,000, like what does that do? And in most states, it's going to be fairly graduated until that cliff level. And then that's just going to vary by state and by family size. I
just imagine, Brad, that we have like this subset of like ultra optimizers that in the middle of December are looking at how they can capitalize that last $137.86,
I'm sure it happens.
So Tanja, I mean, this is an area of your policy expertise, I'm assuming, based on how you're describing all this, right?
I would say not directly, but it's something that I've touched a bit in my work, and it's something that then I've taken a much deeper interest in. So I definitely am that nerdy person who reads the text of the bills and goes through all of the different healthcare analysis that's out there.
We found someone, Brad, in the FI community that also has read the documents. This is perfect. I am selfishly interested in continuing this conversation.
Well, I haven't read like the prospectus on VTSAX or any of those. So
we have plenty of other people that have done that.
I'll take care of the healthcare stuff for us.
Nice. So yeah, to be continued on the healthcare on a future episode for sure.
Tanja, Great. You think there's a full 60 minutes there, right? That we could dive into and really explore all of it?
Oh, yeah. Especially if we actually prepped for it and could talk about different state scenarios. Because I don't know if I sent you this post, but the one about, all the retirement articles out there like tell you, hey, here are the great states to move to for retirees. And it's all basically just based on income tax, which I think is so short-sighted because the states that have no income tax also tend to be like universally horrible on healthcare. And for most of us, like income tax is kind of irrelevant. What's more relevant is property tax and health insurance. And so we could go into the state stuff. We could yes, there is so much to go into optimizing around it, kind of policy developments, how you might do healthcare abroad, like all that stuff.
Yes, we need to do that. Let's lock that down, find a date to set that up. But then also before we do a geo arbitrage episode, like we have to have that episode in place. You can't just ignore that and go straight to geo arbitrage. Those go hand in hand.
Yeah, I agree. And that was actually something I was going to ask Tanja about as far as their future FI plans. But let's save that for the future episode, if everyone doesn't mind. I think we finally found our healthcare expert. We've had so many people write into us about, hey, when are you going to have an episode on health insurance, healthcare in early retirement? And honestly, the answer was, we have been struggling with this. It's not that we are just blissfully unaware of the import of this, certainly, but we've been looking for a good answer, which unfortunately there is none currently. But we've also been looking for an expert to help us talk through this. And I think we've found her. So Tanja, thank you.
I don't always love to call myself an expert, but I do think this is something I've spent a ton of time thinking about. So I would love to share more of that with you guys and your listeners.
Yes, please reject the expert label, but I guarantee you know just a little bit more about it than Brad or myself. So using the standard definition, I think you can qualify.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, so here's another consideration for you. How will you keep your body and mind healthy? What's the play there? Because I think there is this almost path of least resistance where you just find the couch and you do your benders on Netflix and you focus on gaining that 20 to 30 pounds. And especially with the self-driving cars, right, Brad? At some point in time, you're not even going to be responsible for your turn signals or your windshield wipers. Basically, you're solely going to be responsible for just getting to your car. Just pass out, go to sleep. The autonomous vehicle fleet just takes over.
That is my goal. The autonomous vehicle fleet taking over. That's a dream of mine. So yeah, again, for another podcast.
Elon Musk is so thrilled with you. And I don't think that that's just an FI or early retirement problem. I think that's a human problem. And I think evolutionarily, if you look at essentially all animals, we are wired to do the least amount of physical work possible to conserve our energy and our body fat because, the winter's coming and we might need to go a long time without eating. So that's just human nature. Anyone who's had dogs know dogs will eat every bit of food you put in front of them and they will happily get fat. So this is just a good question we should all be thinking about. But I think it was really something that came into focus for us because we just feel like the last few years of work, we've really pushed ourselves so hard that it's had an impact on our health. And then we've heard other folks have written to us and told us how after they quit, they slept for basically a year. They slept 14 hours a day for a year to make up some of that backlog from what they'd acquired through work. And I could see that being us, to be honest. But I think that's important and you need to catch up on sleep. Sleep is super important to health, but you can't only do that. And I think that there is sometimes this tendency to want to detox or, kind of heal from something. And that often involves rest. But it's important to think of self-care as also the physical activity part, the healthy eating part. I could see us, and I won't speak for anybody else out there, but I could see us kind of going oh my gosh, we did this huge thing. Let's celebrate and let's act like total kids and eat nothing but donuts for a month. We're totally healthy eaters, but we do love junk food. We're not those virtuous folks who eat healthily because they don't like the unhealthy stuff. We totally love it.
Me too.
But that's really bad. We can't do that. We can't eat donuts and sit on the couch watching Netflix and expect to live this long, healthy life that we're planning out for ourselves. And that list of things on our to-do list, that cannot happen if we are not able-bodied and clear-minded. And so it's really important to us that we maintain that health. And it's just good for everybody to think through that plan of what are you going to do? And one thing I'll add is it's important to be realistic. If you've never run in your life, maybe don't think about running a marathon in all 50 states as your major goal. Maybe start small or think about something that actually feels like something in your wheelhouse. But that said, if you can be like Brad and take on CrossFit and hardcore martial arts, good for you. It's great to stretch yourself, but just keep it a little bit in the bounds of realism.
Perfect. One of the things that I think our audience and your community as well will be really excited about is finding out, what does our next life actually look like? What is a day in retirement going to look like for you? And what do those social interactions and those social circles actually look like once you've pulled the trigger on this?
I'll be honest, I'm excited to see what that's going to look like too. we live in a place in a mountain town where a lot of folks don't work full time. So I think we'll have a slightly easier time with this than a lot of folks will. But we've heard from plenty of folks who've said, like, I was so excited to retire and see people more, but then I realized, like, when I'm free, they're all at work. And we know from the health data that social interactions are super important to stay healthy, that people who become socially isolated tend to die the earliest, have the lowest quality of life, like a whole bunch of stuff that I know none of us want. But I've heard again from plenty of folks who've said they became more isolated after they retired early, or like they went into kind of this self-care mode for a while after they quit, of just trying to rest up and regroup and kind of figure out what's next, that they didn't pursue those social circles. And then when they were ready to get back to them, their friends had moved on, which is just so sad. And so I think that's a situation none of us want to find ourselves in, which is why it's worth thinking about ahead of time. But I know, like, we're going to be working really hard to go out and see our friends and ski with them and hike with them and do all that stuff on a regular basis, have people over for potlucks and things so that we don't skip a beat there.
Brad, I know this is something that you've struggled with.
Yeah, it certainly is something that's been top of mind for me recently. I've realized just as part of FI that one thing that energizes me are these human connections and finding friends, finding a community. We've been fortunate enough to have a FI community here in Richmond, which I'm trying to get everybody together on a more regular basis. But I think, Tanja, also you need to, this is one thing I've struggled with, is you need to understand that you're at FI and everybody else isn't, right? So for me, it's, I want to get together with people. I have this time. I have resources. I'd love to do things, but people are busy. People are tired. It's not that easy. And I think I've let that get me down mentally. And I think that's really silly. And I've kind of come around to just being realistic about it. Just because I have all this free time clearly doesn't mean that everybody else does. But I think I've also tried to make more of an effort than I ever have in the past. And that helps. And again, this is something that I've put a lot of time and thought into. So I'd say just stick with it. It sounds like you have a real cool town there where people are out and about and doing exciting things. So it should make it a little bit easier. But I think that focus on being realistic is an important thing.
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that. I think I am always on board with the advice to be realistic. I think it also, for a lot of folks, probably means finding some new friends whose situation in life more closely matches your own, which I think in some cases might mean befriending traditional retirees who are free at the same time, or it might mean befriending folks who are a lot younger, who aren't in that full-time career grind yet, or some combination of both. We're definitely proponents of having friends of many different ages so that you stay connected to different ideas and grounded in different generational thinking. I think that's really important.
And we're in this unique situation in the United States where we're just seeing this surge of momentum in the actual FI community. And we're seeing a lot of these relationships and communities go from just the digital space, which it's traditionally been. You find a small niche, a small people of like minds. But we're seeing this really widespread desire to form these communities in local geographic regions. And there's enough of us that in large cities and even in some of the smaller cities, it's a possibility.
Absolutely. And I think even if you're in a place where you don't feel like there's anyone locally who shares this mindset, like, I get a ton out of the friends I've made online. And there are people I Skype with and people who I meet up with in other forums. So I think there are now a lot of great places to find community across FI, whether it's on some of the forums, if you're into that, or finding folks who comment on some of the blogs that you enjoy reading most. I heard from some of our readers that they've befriended other folks who commented, and they actually now have fruitful friendships outside of our blog. Like, I love hearing that. That's really great. There is this idea in sort of like the success narrative of now, which I'm sure you guys have heard, which is something like you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, or something like that. Are you guys familiar with this idea?
Yeah, it's a Jim Rohn quote.
Okay, great. Yeah, you knew where it came from. I did not. I just have absorbed it from the ether. It's an interesting notion because I think to achieve FI, that would tend to push you toward finding higher income people or higher achieving people, which is great when you're in the accumulation phase, but then it's an interesting contradiction when, Brad, to your point, you get to actual FI, you're not working, and you're FI, but then your friends aren't or are still working. And I actually think it's important to think about sort of 2 tracks, perhaps, that you've got the folks who push you and who are your aspirational social circle, but then you've also got the folks who are maybe in a life circumstance that's a little bit closer to what you want in FI. Like, our friends here in Tahoe are not like powerhouse, power couple couple high earner, high achiever folks. They are people who think that life is much more important than money, that follow their values, that are living the dream, like doing amazing stuff, but they are not folks who have a ton of money in the bank. And those are people who are great for us to hang out with because they aren't looking to spend a bunch of money and go out to an expensive dinner. They aren't trying to talk us into going on some extravagant trip. Like they want to go hang out at the park or go on a hike or ski together or do things that are very low cost. And so I think it's worth thinking that point through too, and not just attaching yourself to all these folks where they're going to make you feel guilty for not wanting to spend money or who are going to question your life choices once you get to a point where you go like, yeah, I have all this freedom, but that means I'm not necessarily going to spend on the same thing you guys are.
So Tanja, this has been a journey for you. I would say that you taking the time to commit your ideas and thoughts to the blog that you've been writing for the last 3 years, even if nobody had read it, would have been a way for you to cement ultimately what a successful retirement looks like. I think there's definitely value to just committing your ideas to paper. But I'm curious for you on the backside of this journey, you are at FI and you are now living our next life. And how do you evaluate success? How do you evaluate your self-worth post-career?
This is something I've thought a lot about, but I would say I do not have answers on this. I expect this fully to be a journey. I think for me, it's really important to feel like I'm able to have an impact in my community. And I think that before we started the blog, I probably would have defined that more in terms of like the nonprofits and folks in need here where we live. I think now I see it more as both the in-person community, but also this online community that I feel so fortunate to be a part of and thinking about that. But, like that could change too. Who knows if anybody's going to want to read blogs about FI in 2-3 years? Like maybe everybody will be doing this. It'll be a foregone conclusion and we won't have to talk about it anymore. Let's all hope. But I think it's a really important question for folks to have in mind, and also to try to think about like, what are the ways that we can feel successful without having titles, without having money, I always talk about gold stars because I am totally like the Lisa Simpson who wants praise for everything. But when that goes away, like how do we find that within ourselves, or how do we find other ways to get it? Yeah, I do not have answers yet, but it's something that I'm going to be paying close attention to and continuing to think and write about, because I think it's a really important piece of all this and how we feel like we're living a worthwhile life without sort of the traditional construct of what that means, without that work piece.
I feel like there's going to be a blog article called How Do You Define Success? That's coming.
There are probably like 3 versions of that already, but I probably have already changed my thinking on each of them.
Nice.
Because that's how it goes.
Well, yeah, certainly, Tanja, based on how much fun this conversation was, I know I had an absolute blast. We are unquestionably going to have you back on for the healthcare. And then hopefully maybe a year from now, we'll talk about what your life does look like post-FI and how you've defined yourself. I think that would be a fascinating journey just to see this first episode and then see where you went. Because like you said, you simply don't know where it's going to go.
I'm excited to come back. Thanks for offering.
Yeah, you bet. Anytime.
All right, Tanja. Well, that concludes the main portion of this interview. But before we let you go, we really want to give you a chance to tackle the hot seat. Have you heard our hot seat yet? Do you know what's coming?
I have. Is it music time?
It is music time.
Oh, you bet.
In a world drowning in debt and rampant consumption, trapped by the chains of lifestyle inflation, these questions highlight the secrets of those who have broken free. Welcome to the Choose FI Hot Seat.
Can I confess something?
Please.
I listen to all my podcasts at 1.5 speed. And so I've never actually heard that at normal 1x speed, but it sounds so much more dramatic. Ooh.
Yeah.
I feel the pressure.
That's awesome. Yeah, Brad's a big fan of the 1.5x. I try, but I'm normally letting my wife listen to him at the same time, and I feel like I can't put her through that ordeal, so I normally go back down to 1.
Oh yeah, Mark can't handle it either. He hates it.
All right, Tanja, question number 1, your favorite blog that's not your own?
I am going to do just a couple, and I want to give a shout out to the ladies because I think that it's a misconception that there are very few women in the FI space. I think there are actually quite a lot. We just don't always have the loudest voices, but one of my favorites is definitely She Picks Up Pennies. She doesn't write specifically about FI, but writes about a lot of stuff that's peripheral to it and is just so wonderfully thoughtful, and I just love her writing. Maggie, who writes Northern Expenditure, is another great one. She and her family live in Alaska, and they're on a journey to early retirement. Probably that's a little bit slower pace than some of us, but just she's hilarious, such a good person, and I love her posts. And then Kate Flanders is a good friend who writes a lot about things that touch on some of our values, like spending around your values, being mindful with your spending. She's huge into minimalism, but sort of like rejecting the title minimalism. So all great blogs that I highly recommend.
Question number 2, your favorite article of all time?
I'm going to go a little bit off the beaten path here because I really respect all the folks who've laid out the financial fundamentals, but it's probably not shocking to hear that I value the mindset and the journey stuff a little bit more. There is a blog called The Resume Gap, written by Matt, that I absolutely love. He and his partner are traveling the world right now, so they've been a little too busy to blog much lately, but he was able to hit FI in his mid-20s. I'm not even joking. And he wrote a wonderful post called Don't Press Fast Forward on Your Life, about not being so focused on the next thing that you kind of miss out on your life now. And I just think he's a wonderful writer, such a thoughtful guy, crazy nice in person. I love him and hope he gets back to writing more at some point. And then one of my posts that I'd shout out to is called Don't Listen to Us, Bloggers Don't Tell the Full FI Story, which I think is just a really good kind of reality check for folks who read a lot of FI blogs, because there's kind of this contradiction that all the bloggers that you've heard of that have been big and successful at it, who are proponents of living off the 4% rule or doing all this stuff, like they're all making a bunch of money with their blogs. And so they're not actually testing the plan they've been out there promoting. And then the folks who are actually living off their plans are generally not continuing to blog about it. So we have a little bit of a disconnect in that the folks we're listening to as the authorities are not actually practicing what they preach. And it's not a criticism of them at all. It's wonderful that they're getting paid for their great blogging work. And as they should, they're putting a ton of time into this stuff. But it's just an important thing for us all to know as we sort of consider the source on this stuff and put our own plans together.
Yeah, I think that's very insightful. And it's just kind of a good reorientation when you're absorbing a lot of content, especially when you're binge reading it all, just to put that in perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Plus, most of the people who are blogging these subjects have started their blogs since the last financial crisis. So have only been tracking finances or saving or living in retirement in a really historically long bull market. So there's definitely some recency bias in there as well. That's just worth taking into account as you plan your own future.
All right. Well, we will link to both those articles in the show notes.
All right. Question number 3, your favorite life hack.
This will be my shortest answer because it is so easy to answer, but unquestionably, favorite life hack is paying ourselves first through automation.
Yeah, that's something that I've used for years. It's how I was able to really force myself to pay down my student loans. And it's also something that we've seen highlighted in past episodes, talking about lowering the barrier of entry and just kind of set and forget, and your path will dictate itself.
Yeah, I started with $200 a month going to a savings account, and we've now ramped it up to thousands of dollars a month going into investments. We don't even think about it. It just happens. We never see that money. We never feel like we have it to spend. And that is the single biggest secret of our success, is just not even making it a choice.
All right, question number 4, your biggest financial mistake.
I don't totally believe in mistakes because I think they do tend to be teachable moments. And I think a lot of the stuff we've done over the years, like having some years of a lot of spending, what we call our baller years, helped us appreciate different things about life that have honed our approach now. But one thing I will confess to is we didn't invest a penny in a Roth IRA when we were below the income cap. And so we've been priced out of them for a few years now, but we are probably the only early retirees in the world, or at least in the US, where we have Roths who have not a penny in a Roth. You heard it here first.
The secrets come out. I like it.
Do we change question number 4 to your biggest teachable moment? Oh, come on, Brad. You got to give me more than that.
And it falls flat. Sorry.
All right. Question number 5, advice you would give to your younger self.
I think just being more intentional about the stuff you buy. We are definitely not minimalists. And I think anyone who's been to our house knows that we have an embarrassing amount of outdoor gear in particular because that's so important to us. But I think about how much stuff I've had to declutter and get rid of over the years, and knowing, especially after I researched it, that most of that stuff doesn't get sold to people less fortunate. Most of it actually ends up in the landfill, even if you are well-intended and donate it to Goodwill. So yeah, I think just acquire less crap and be really thoughtful. Make sure that the things you buy are things you're really going to use for the long term.
All right. And then we do have a bonus question for you today,
which might be rather comical based on your last answer. But what's your favorite purchase you made on Amazon.com last year?
I was super torn on this because, we still do buy a few things. We always try to buy used first if we can. But if we think something's going to add value, we don't hesitate. We're not like those FI folks who who never shop. But it could be either my standing desk that I bought, which is super fancy and powered, but has made my back feel so much better. And I love it. The other thing was really cheap. The opposite was the eclipse glasses that we bought to go travel up to the path of totality and see the eclipse. And like, that was just so completely life-changing. Please, everybody, if you haven't seen a total eclipse, please get yourself into the path of totality for the next one. It's totality or nothing. We drove up to Weiser, Idaho, and stood in a farm field next to a high school and with a big group of folks. And it was so amazing.
That is awesome. We were not in totality. We were in what, Brad? 75%, something like that?
80 some odd, yeah.
And we did not buy the glasses, but we made the boxes out of cereal boxes. And for about 2.5 minutes, I could see a crescent moon shape on the back of the box. And then my eyes hurt for the remainder of the day. And I wondered if I had done it wrong or if I was going to lose my vision. But it was a thoroughly underwhelming experience.
Yeah. And we got the entire progression. And so up until totality, I would say it was like cool, but not amazing. So I think most of what everybody else got was sort of in that zone of like, okay, that's neat. But man, nothing replaces that moment when you see the moon move in front and you get the diamond ring and then you get the corona and the whole thing. Like, I could fill up a whole episode with just how amazing and life-changing that moment was. So do yourselves a favor. I think that the next eclipse goes a lot closer to you guys. So hopefully it'll be easier to get there, but do it. I promise it's worth it.
All right, add it to the list. Well, before we let you go, obviously there's a lot of people from your community that are going to be hearing this and are going to be very excited to hear your story in person. But aside from that, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be discovering Our Next Life for the first time. And what is the best way for people to connect with you?
Everything that we've got is up on the blog, ournextlife.com. We do social, primarily Twitter and Instagram, and those are both at @our_nextlife. But those are also linked on the blog. So that's a great place to find us. And then we've got a couple of new podcast projects launching in the next few months that we're super excited about. That won't be on FI, but they'll be sort of stuff that I think folks in this community will find interesting. So we'll keep everybody posted on those new things.
And one other announcement I wanted to make is I know for a fact that you are going to be speaking at FinCon, which is going to be coming our way in about a week, right?
Yeah, it's just in a couple days now. And I'm actually going to be in 2 sessions. So I got asked to join the FIRE panel, where we're specifically going to be talking about controversial issues in early retirement, which I'm super excited about. And then I have a session right after that with a bunch of really awesome bloggers, including Mrs. Frugal Woods, who I know is a community favorite here, about how to broaden your audience and reach folks who aren't sort of your natural audience. So really excited about both of those and just chatting with people. I think the best part of FinCon is just all the social time.
Yes, we look forward to meeting you in person there. Well, Tanja, thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing your story. It's just been an absolute blast and really eye-opening on several different levels. So we appreciate you making the time for us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, and especially letting it line up with our big coming out day. It's a super exciting time.
Not a problem at all. It was our pleasure. And we will see you in just a few days at FinCon.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
And thank you for being a part of the Choose FI community. If you want to support us, here are 4 easy ways. 1, leave us an iTunes review. If you want to do that, just go to choosefi.com/iTunes. 2, use our page to sign up for travel credit cards. If you want to travel the world with miles and points instead of your hard-earned dollars, then just go to choosefi.com/cards and get started today. 3, if you're working on the milestones of FI, set up a personal capital account to track your progress and use our affiliate link. It's completely free, and just go to choosefi.com/PC. P as in Paul, C as in cat. And 4, and most importantly, find your friends, coworkers, and family members who might be open to this message and tell them about the podcast. Have them start with episode 38, The Why of FI, and right behind that, have them go listen to episode 21, The Pillars of FI. It is a fantastic starting place. All right, my friends, the fire is spreading. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.
You've been listening to Choose FI Radio Podcast, where we help middle-class America build wealth, one life hack at a time.